as a sector, as a wider industry, have been receiving for government since the tragedy of Grenfell is, well, we shouldn't wait for government to tell us what to do. Get on with it. So actually, that's what we're doing, is getting on with it. We have to be cognizant of, we need to have government along with us and government officials along with us, because actually they play a huge part in that landscape, and they're one of the sort of like the players in that landscape, and we have to sort of ensure that sort of like we bring them along with us.
I'm getting the impression then that in the past we've thought of the fire sector as a kind of a defined group of people that are involved in fire 100% of the time. But actually, with the work you've been doing and the more we've analysed it, it isn't defined that tightly at all. There's a group over here, it might be ironmongers, there's a group over here that maybe do doors, or there's a group over here that do dry lining, and then there's people that design it, there's people that put them together as well as make the product. So a multiple, complex, diverse group of associations, organizations. Is that the big challenge, to work across that complex landscape now? Is that the next big challenge?
I think if you put it in the context of the built environment, the one thing that strikes you every time is building a building, operating a building. It's a complex thing. There are multiple actors in it. As much as we like to put everybody into different silos, that you're part of this part of the sort of the universe, you're that part of the universe. Actually, when we talk about fire safety, there's a multitude of actors in that space. And as we start thinking about, well, who do we need to sort of involve, you realise that there's multiple levels of people that you perhaps need to involve. But actually, when you start thinking about it as a strategic level, you start thinking, well, there's some core actors in there that we need to sort of make sure that we talk to and we involve, and then we bring others in as we need to sort of discuss some of these issues. But importantly, as we find information or we find issues, we have to make sure they get out to the right people. And that means across this complex landscape of actors, to ensure everybody understands some of these issues or how they may impact them and their roles in fire safety. And I think that's where really the challenge lies, is how do you sort of bring information in and importantly get information back out to this wide group of people. And that's where I think that complexity perhaps lies.
Steve?
Yeah, so I just about to add to Tom's points. I think it's at one level it's a much closer marriage, I suppose, or symbiotic relationship between the construction sector and what we would have easily recognised in the past as being the fire sector. So active fire protection, passive fire protection. There are companies and organisations whose existence is dedicated to matters associated with fire. But against the construction sector, there are organisations for whom fire is a big part of the risks that they face, but actually it's not the central thing that they do. So this morning I had a good conversation with the finishings trade association, FIS, and of course massive issue in terms of fire, but they've also got to think about acoustics and insulation and aesthetics. So there's a whole series of issues pressing down on how they think about working with their members, and one bit of it is the fire relationships. So we also need to make sure we can weave in to thinking about fire organisations for whom fire is a part of their kind of purpose, but not all of it. And so that as well as organisations whose only purpose in life is fire. And then the other aspect of that, if I might, is wedding that to the way enforcers approach. Because remember, this is about public safety, and also there needs to be some underlying confidence amongst the general public that some of these rules and regulations are getting enforced by somebody. But of course, what we want to see is that enforcement done in a proportionate way, in a sensible way. Everybody will accept it's absolutely necessary, but you need to make sure that there's an understanding. So again, what we think we can do is bring together the policy of government, but along with enforcers like the fire chiefs and building control departments, in order to make sure, my point earlier, Chris, about seeing this as a cyclical and ongoing thing, that as the landscape changes, we can react by informing our members and colleagues, whether it's a construction product, whether it's a testing regime that needs to change. Reality always lags innovation. Legislation always lags innovation. I think what we need to be ensured is that we know what's going on across the piece, and we can work with partners to change things and adapt without waiting for government necessarily to force that to happen. Albeit somewhere down the line government may still need to intervene, but ideally we can be doing things and making changes and adapting because they are a sensible thing to do.
So you lead me on very, very nicely, Steve, as if you could read my mind. My next question was about government, and firstly how they accepted the maybe it's not even worth looking back 12 months to see how they accepted the proposal. In the intervening 12 months since then, how they taken to the proposal of a national strategy, and fully accepting that we can't wait for them to legislate. We don't want to wait for them to legislate. We need to get on and do this stuff, which is what we're doing. But we obviously need government support, and it would be better to have government support in all of this. How are they involved in what you're doing and the direction of travel you're going in?
So I'll kick off, and Tom will probably say a few. So we've certainly engaged at a parliamentary level through the all-party parliamentary group, and we need to kind of come back at it again. So there's kind of a level of interest there. We are already engaged with the government through its preparatory work for the Building Safety Act coming in later the year, and all the work on the Building Safety Bill and so on. So we're engaged with the different departments of government, whether it's the Home Office or the OPSS or whatever. And so we've carried on working with them and trailing our thinking with them about the way forward. I mean, just about now, they're absolutely focused and incredibly busy trying to get all the guidance and legislation in place. They're working to a very, very tight legislative timetable against the likelihood of a general election next year. So they're not really very interested in esoteric, abstract debates about, wouldn't the world be wonderful if the gardens were green and the skies were blue and we'd have this lovely joined up sector. But what they can see is the importance of a way of organising debate, discussion and thinking going forward. And you made the point that how they reacted to us saying to them, we can't wait for you. I'd turn it on its head, Chris. Really, government wants to legislate as little as possible. And I think that remains the case today and will for the future. Ideally, it wants the industry, or whatever that industry is, to sort itself out and to almost self-regulate. Problem comes when it doesn't do that very well. If you can see with the fire world, whether that's Grenfell or whatever, in other worlds, we've got issues now about vaping and lithium-ion batteries. And so there's lots of examples of where innovations have moved forward, and there comes a point in time where the government has no choice but to regulate because of political or social pressure. But that for them is the last resort. From our point of view, what they'd rather is what our conversation is, and what Tom may well come on to, is getting the right mechanisms in place within which people can think together, produce good quality thought leadership, documents, consensus papers, white papers, develop a body of knowledge and opinion that then can shape a direction of travel that the players agree to follow without government intervening. And government's intervention should only be the very last resort. And they are absolutely in agreement with that principle.
Tom, anything to add?
I totally agree with what Steve said, that the government departments and officials that we've discussed this with have all sort of been curious about what it is, but then they can see opportunities for this mechanism, this strategic view, and they can see a part that they can play. But we have to remember that if there's one message we as a sector, as a wider industry, have been receiving for government since the tragedy of Grenfell is, well, we shouldn't wait for government to tell us what to do, get on with it. So actually, that's what we're doing, is getting on with it. We have to be cognizant of, we need to have government along with us and government officials along with us, because actually they pay a huge part in that landscape. and they're one of the sort of like the players in that landscape, and we have to sort of ensure that sort of like we bring them along with us.